The year is 1972. Democrats are facing a reelection campaign from incumbent Richard Nixon, convinced the only way they will win is with a new progressive coalition of college-educated voters, young people, and minorities. They choose to nominate McGovern. This was a huge mistake, which resulted in one of the worst defeats of the Democratic Party in U.S. history. Richard Nixon won with 520 electoral votes. Basically, the entire country turns red, and only one state votes McGovern, giving him just 17 electoral votes. Today, we're hearing much of the same from the Democratic Party, at least a large portion of it, saying we need the educated college elite, we need young people and minorities. It seems like a repeat is occurring. Democrats, at least young ones, couldn't have learned from history because these young progressives did not experience that history. And we very well may be facing a historical defeat in line with the 1972 election. What makes this story interesting is that the election in 1968 that got Richard Nixon elected in the first place was actually pretty close, but his re-election was a resounding landslide. Today, Democrats and media pundits are sounding the alarm, saying this is what's going to happen. With Tim Ryan saying we could lose 48 states if Bernie Sanders is the nominee. Perhaps the reason the establishment Democrats and many older people are panicking is because they did experience that history. They know what happens when you move too far left. But the young activists of today don't know better. So they're reaching as far left as possible, and they will give Trump a landslide. This is all made worse by the news that Bernie Sanders is winning the popular vote, though Buttigieg does have the delegate count, and that unions, some of the most powerful unions in these key states, are opposing or putting up opposition to Bernie Sanders. That means he won't even have labor at his back. Meanwhile, they're calling today's economy the blue collar boom. I think it stands to reason that Donald Trump is on track for a record landslide victory. But don't take my word for it. Let's start with Tim Ryan, a Democratic congressman. And then I'm going to teach y'all a little bit about history, but full disclosure, I am no historian. There's probably a ton of nuance that I am missing, so I'm doing my best. I'm 33. I was not alive when this stuff happened, but many people were. And those people probably fear the same thing is about to happen, and that's why they're saying it. But let's read from the Washington Examiner. Quote, "We lose 48 states. Democratic congressman says Trump would demolish a Democratic Socialist candidate." Now, before we read, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There's a PayPal option, a crypto option, a physical address. But of course, the best thing you can do is share this video. Why? Well, this is a history lesson, at least to the best of my abilities. And then we'll bring it to the modern news. But boy, oh boy, I'm reading this stuff, and they've been issuing these warnings going back to 2017 that Bernie Sanders and the Democratic Party are walking us towards 1972 all over again. So share it if you think people would be interested or if you want to help my channel grow. Unfortunately, I'm willing to bet there are many Bernie Sanders supporters who don't want to learn from history or are just unconvinced. Now, there is an interesting counter argument to this, that Bernie Sanders could also be Donald Trump 2.0, that what we're seeing might actually be an insurgency candidate who wins. The problem? Bernie Sanders, assuming he is Trump 2.0, is going up against Trump 1.0, who has a 4-year track record at his back. The economy is great. I don't think it will play out the way they think it will. I think they're going to nominate Bernie, and if they do, they will lose 48 states. Now, I will also add, superdelegates probably going to swoop in to save the day, but let's read the story from the Examiner. Former presidential candidate Tim Ryan warned that Democrats could lose 48 states in 2020 if they picked a Democratic Socialist to lead the ticket. Ryan, an Ohio congressman who has endorsed Joe Biden since dropping out, argued that picking Bernie Sanders would be a mistake for Democrats. He told Fox News on Tuesday that the public would not support a self-described Democratic Socialists. Quote, "I personally am very, very concerned about some of the folks who are running," Ryan said. "I think you know, if we run under a Democratic Socialist banner in 50 states, I think we lose the industrial Midwest. I think we lose 48 states. I think we lose working class union voters who have negotiated their private health care and want to keep it, and they don't want to be forced into a public health care system." He added, "You lose those voters And I think some of the other issues as well. I think that would be disastrous for us. I think Joe Biden is the absolute best candidate for us. I think he beats Donald Trump in the swing states and the industrial Midwest. And it's going to be a new day in America. Ryan touted Biden's electability across the country, but the former vice president struggled in Iowa and announced he wouldn't stay in New Hampshire to see the results Tuesday night, instead opting to go to South Carolina. Ryan suggested that Iowa and New Hampshire were road games and claimed that Biden would start to see some victories when he plays some home games in South Carolina and other industrial states on Super Tuesday. Ryan's concerns are not unfounded. A Gallup poll released on Tuesday revealed that a majority of respondents would not support a socialist for president, repeating results we've seen in the past. And there you have it. We are on track, it would seem, for a repeat of 1972. And let me show you a story going back a few years. This is from Politico magazine. Are Democrats headed for a McGovern Redux? Now stick with me. This is fascinating stuff when I'm reading about this. But I've got a ton of modern news. Bernie Sanders is underperforming. We've got a contested Democratic Party. There is no unity, no coalition. In fact, many people might actually switch to Donald Trump, dare I say, with comedians like Dave Chappelle, Joe Rogan, Ricky Gervais pushing back on the far left wokeness that is embraced by many of the Democrats. The Democrats actually tore Joe Rogan up because he said he would consider voting for Bernie Sanders. They went after him. Joe Rogan has the most popular podcast in the world. I'm sorry. I think they're going to go flocking to Donald Trump. Now, it is fair to say that Joe Rogan's endorsement or tacit endorsement may actually lend some support for Sanders. But the way they went after him afterwards, I don't know. I think a lot of people are going to be just tired, just completely fed up with the woke outrage. And they're going to be looking at a record economy. But let me read you something. This is amazing stuff from 2017, October 9th. They write, 4 decades ago, Richard Nixon lived out the fantasy many liberals harbor about Donald Trump, stepping down in the face of possible impeachment over a slow-moving scandal long before his term was up. Before that happened, however, Nixon was reelected by a resounding margin, in large part because progressives made strategic errors that Democrats today appear hell-bent on repeating. In 1968, as in 2016, Democrats narrowly lost the White House after nominating a relatively moderate establishment candidate instead of a more liberal alternative who had inspired a raging enthusiasm among younger voters. Democrats spent much of the next 4 years arguing about what direction the party should take. White working class voters, traditionally a Democratic bloc, were sluicing away, and progressives, convinced the party needed to change both its policy direction and its coalition of supporters, demanded a new approach. A, quote, loose peace coalition of minorities, young voters, and educated white Democrats. As strategist Fred Dutton wrote in his 1971 book, Changing Sources of Power. 1 year later, the party's presidential nominee, the ultra-liberal Senator George McGovern of South Dakota, went on to lose 49 states in one of the most lopsided victories in American history. It was not just a resounding defeat for Democrats. It was one of the worst defeats we have ever seen in this country. The results of the 1972 election. Richard Nixon with 520 electoral votes, George McGovern with only 17. He only carried Massachusetts and Washington, D.C. The electoral map is completely red. And many people have been warning for years now. We are on track for the same thing. Tim Ryan isn't the first person to do so. But what makes this so interesting is the results of the 1968 election that got Richard Nixon elected in the first place, because this was close. You see, the Democrats made the mistake. They thought the problem was their candidate was just too much of a boring moderate who couldn't light up that youth vote and get those people together. They thought they needed a broad coalition and new voters, when in reality, they just needed to campaign a little bit better. Hillary Clinton absolutely could have won in 2016 if she actually went to the Rust Belt, but she didn't. Take a look at this. Richard Nixon in 1968 won with 301 electoral votes to Hubert Humphrey's 191. Now, there was a third party candidate, George Wallace, the independent, with 46. So it is a bit different. But here we can see the electoral map is not completely red. Democrats actually stood a chance. Now take a look at 2016. Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton. He did lose the popular vote, which is interesting, but around 304 electoral votes. It really does seem like history is set to repeat itself. Donald Trump with a narrow victory in 2016, and now warnings that the Democrats are making the same mistake they made in 1972. The problem was not necessarily a moderate candidate. It was your bad candidate, but it was also the fact that Hillary Clinton didn't go to Rust Belt states. She lost very narrowly in certain states. She could have won. Stay the course, improve your game, and you can win. But a radical change, a revolution, is not the path to victory. Which brings me to the more modern news. You see, it's not only Tim Ryan saying this. On February 3rd, not happy with the field, Chris Matthews of MSNBC says 2020 Democrats can't beat Trump. Interestingly, he also invokes 1972. They say Matthews went on to criticize Bernie Sanders, saying he's not going to be president, and that the Vermont senator's campaign reminds him of the 1972 presidential election, in which the Democratic nominee George McGovern won only one state in Washington, D.C., against incumbent Republican President Richard Nixon. He said that McGovern's campaign feels a lot like Sanders and argued that both, quote, excited the party. He also felt like Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts was riding high before getting bogged down by a lot of scrutiny. Now, I'm not super concerned with Warren because she's kind of out of the race. But my understanding is Chris Matthews is, at 74, he lived that. He lived through McGovern. He knows exactly. He has the experience. Now, I don't. I'm 33, wasn't alive. So I can only imagine if he thinks it feels the same way, it probably does. And look, I got to tell you, man, this conversation around 1972 has started to pick up steam. This is the repeat. Another story from the Washington Examiner. Democratic contests looks like catastrophic mess of 1972. Here's the challenge. You've got these young activists convinced their new freaky ideology, which most people don't like, is the path to victory. Elizabeth Warren started embracing that woke nonsense, and now she's fallen off a cliff. Kirsten Gillibrand did. She fell off a cliff, too. Bernie Sanders has tried to avoid it to a certain degree, but he's got AOC and other woke nonsense at his heels. But more importantly, let's not even talk about ideology and culture war. Let's talk about labor. They say that the socialists are all for the working class. They're there to support labor. What happens then when it's labor unions coming out against Bernie Sanders? These activists dominating the party have no idea what they are talking about. Las Vegas union bosses are lining up to stop Bernie's momentum. What's your response to that? Why are the unions against Bernie Sanders? Why are so many working class people supporting Donald Trump? Why do they call this the blue collar boom? How is Bernie Sanders supposed to win if he's just getting college educated urban elites? He won't. Dare I say, it's possible. It's possible that Bernie is a new Trump. He's a populist and he takes that victory, surprises everybody. There's a first time for everything. And just because we saw something similar doesn't mean the same thing's going to happen. But I think if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. It's not just Las Vegas. This story is shocking. In New Flyer, Culinary Union warns members Sanders would end their health care if elected president. This is one of the most powerful unions in the state, warning their staff about Bernie Sanders. Washington Post reported in August of last year, Bernie Sanders changes how Medicare for All plans treats union contracts in face of opposition by organized labor. Let me ask you this question. The socialists that we see on videos, in videos, they tend to be young college kids. How come we never see construction workers, carpenters, masons, plumbers, trade union members? We never see it. It's always young, scrawny Antifa types wearing their little, flag shirts and waving their little flags. But it's never actual labor. The people who support Bernie Sanders are not. They're not the working class individuals in this country. They are not the blue collar Joes for the most part. The people who are on the ground and championing Sanders are these progressive ultra elites. Now, don't get me wrong. There absolutely are working class people behind Bernie Sanders, 100%. But Bernie's flip-flopped so hard from where he was in 2015, I'm willing to bet he lost a lot of that support. And like I stated earlier on, if he is just like Trump, why would anyone choose him over Trump when they got a Trump already? They got somebody in the White House advocating for them, for rural areas, for the white working class, for the working class in general. Unemployment is at record lows. African-American unemployment, Latino unemployment, everything is going great. Bernie Sanders can say he has his coalition, but at the end of the day, Money talks, BS walks. I don't think any of this is going to matter. I think what we're seeing is woke activists who know how to use media manipulating the game to try and get what they want, but they will face a major defeat come the end of this year. It's not just that the people, these unions oppose Bernie Sanders, but the Wall Street Journal reports this story is from September of 2019. Democrats labor to stem flow of union voters to Trump. Trump won in 2016 in part by peeling off rank and file union members. Now, Democrats hope to lure them back. Sorry. Over the past couple of years since Trump won, there have been Democrats pushing back against Bernie Sanders. Now, don't get me wrong. Many unions are pro Bernie Sanders, but they're split. The Democrats don't have a unified union message, meaning Trump's got that advantage. And more importantly, as we move now to the modern era, one of the reasons I think we're on track to see a 1972 repeat, even the progressive website, Vox.com says, did Bernie Sanders underperform in New Hampshire? Voter turnout is at the center of Sanders' theory of the case for his campaign, and it wasn't stellar in New Hampshire. As I've stated time and time again, Bernie is supposed to be bringing out this new coalition, right? College educated, the youth vote, the minority vote. He's not. The youth vote was down. First time voters is down. Progressives have repeatedly said Sanders will win because he's going to get people who have never voted before to vote. And even a tiny, tiny percentage increase will guarantee his victory. We didn't see it. Now, look, in Iowa, voter turnout was not good for anyone. In New Hampshire, voter turnout was great. But if Bernie's going to win on this strategy, he needs young people and first-time voters, and those numbers were down, at least from preliminary projections. So it does not stand to reason that's actually what's going to happen. And now we have Congress. It's not about the presidency, for the most part. We have Congress. And this is also obvious. I got to admit, I was really bored by these stories today. And I'm like, I think it's really interesting that everyone's screaming 1972. And I got to agree with them. But what's funny is, I see the story in the New York Times. Moderate Democrats fear Bernie Sanders could cost them the House. Lawmakers who flipped Republican districts in 2018 worry that a Democratic Socialist at the top of the ticket could doom their reelection chances. Duh. I'm just so bored with this being so obvious. Moody's Analytics, which I cite so often, said Trump could actually win 400 electoral votes if, the economy holds and if there is low voter turnout. I'm curious, though, if Moody's factored in what would happen if there was ideological opposition on top of the support for Trump over the economy. Look, many people are going to vote for Trump because they can see it in their pocketbook. They're looking at the gold lined in their jeans, and they're happy about it. I've talked to so many people who said 2019 was their best year ever. But there are a lot of people who are also in this for the cultural reasons. I did a podcast with Jack Murphy recently, and he said that this is really about cultural issues, less so policy. Well, probably for him and many, many people who flipped from Obama to Trump. It's political correctness. Bill Maher and Megyn Kelly said so when they talked a few weeks ago, that Americans will take it from the mouth of a werewolf if he pushes back on this. What about socialism? Factor in the anti-PC individuals who like Dave Chappelle, who like Joe Rogan, who like Ricky Gervais. Factor in the policy junkies who are happy with the economy. Factor in the working class, the union members who say everything's going great and I want to keep my private health care. And then factor in the people who freak out and are terrified of socialism. And it stands to reason. You've got everything lining up perfectly for a 1972 repeat. And I didn't come up with this. I'm not going to say who did. I mean, it was in the media. But even a Democratic congressman is saying we could lose 48 states. That's right. It could very well end up being 1972 again. And there's one last factor that I think is going to play a role in this. This story from The Hill. Manchin is not ruling out endorsing Trump for re-election. Now, it's strange the story would emerge or that he would say this considering he just voted to convict Trump in the impeachment process. He's a Democrat. But what about the Democrats who defect? What about the potential for Democrats to actually endorse Trump over Bernie? What about the moderate Democrats now calling themselves the Never Bernie movement who flock to Trump? What about the Yang or Bust movement? What about the people who absolutely refuse to vote for Bernie? Now, I said it early on. I said it a week or so ago. I think we might see 70 million votes for Trump. I think Trump might have a massive, massive victory, which shocks the left and forces them to course correct. And now it seems like it might be even worse than that. But look. All I can do is read the opinions and conjecture from so many other people, look at history, and try and make predictions to the best of my ability. Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. But let's be honest. It doesn't guarantee everything's going to play out the exact same way. I just really think it's more likely that Trump wins 520 electoral votes than it is that Bernie Sanders stages this revolution and the country goes socialist. The Democrats have been warned. They've been warning themselves, but it doesn't matter. There's no party unity. There's no real party. Like, what does it mean to have a political party? You rally around a core set of ideals, right? The Democrats don't. They're trying. Hey, the moderates are trying. But take a look at Bloomberg's track record. Take a look at Biden's track record. They're getting accused of everything in the book by the woke far left. It's not going to play out the way they think. The fracturing will result in potentially McGovern 2.0. I'll leave it there. Stick around. Next segment's coming up at 6 p.m. at youtube.com/TimCastNews, and I will see you all there.